they're not apathetic in this country. I think we're disillusioned, we're angry. We're just feeling like you're hitting a brick wall all the time. Even more than 30 years. They've done it in the same way, and they think that is the best way to do it. And you can understand, like, they were able to fight off apartheid, they were able to liberate us, etc. Because no longer is it a time when the ANC enjoyed a deep majority, where it was so important, or let me say it this way, where your internal dynamics were more important than your external. It's also one of those spatial apartheid problems. So if you recall, the way the apartheid government set up the infrastructure, whether it was about roads, energy or water, it was never designed to look after masses of people, particularly not masses of black people. Even the Irish Republican Army has ties to the African National Congress, all of these liberation movements. So it cannot be that it dies in our hands. And that's why people ask me, why are you still a member of the ANC?
The views and opinions expressed by our guests are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or positions of this podcast, its hosts, producers, sponsors, or affiliates. Our podcast serves as a platform for open dialogue and diverse perspectives. Any statements made by guests are their individual responsibility and should not be interpreted as an endorsement or official stance of the show.
Welcome to the Hustler's Corner. Brick by brick, the entrepreneur's guide to property wealth. The book is now finally available. Go check it out at all exclusive book stores nationwide. We're going to be following up with tours all over the country, just launching the book, But in launches, we'll form some sort of a tour. We talk about all sorts of different things as far as property investments are concerned in the book. We also have got a couple of developments in the north of Johannesburg by North Riding, by Corner Bears, Nodia and College Road. We're building about 200 houses over there and 100 apartments. So there are opportunities for investment in case you're looking for vacant pieces of land. Get in touch with us. Attend our Wednesday night webinars at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. RSVP, check the link in the description, and email soniamokheseng at gmail.com, or alternatively sonia at djsboo.com. And then every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. we host our show days, so you can see where the location is, what are we doing. You can come and ask all the difficult questions before you become a part of our investment group. I'm excited. The last time I interacted with her, it was around the part, I think it was the Fees Must Fall campaign. That's many years ago. She's gone on to become a member of parliament. Youth unemployment should be declared a state of emergency. That's what she said just recently, using economic beneficiation as a key development intervention to strengthen and localize production and capital rewards by South Africans for South Africa, She's got a strong resume. First female president of the Muslim Students Association in 2013, started student activism at VET's Palestinian Solidarity Movement. 2 terms as VET SRC representing SASCO and PYA, and VET SRC academic officer and VET SRC secretary general, deputy president of the SA Union of Students. You've been putting in work. You've been putting in work, and I'm very excited to invite her, to have her on the Hustler's Corner. Fasiha, Hassan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Oh my God, I was listening to that thinking it sounds so... Oh, it feels like a lifetime ago, eh?
You've been putting in work. The last time I saw you, I wasn't grey. I was young and fresh. Now I'm an OG.
You have more energy than all of us. Anyone who watches your podcast knows that you have the most energy. So don't worry. I think we're aging faster than you are.
Come on. You guys are doing an incredible job. But I think the first thing I'd like to say is congratulations on everything you've achieved.
Yeah, it's surreal, eh? You start off somewhere just very much believing in a cause so deeply, and you don't really know where your future will take you. And then you sit at tables like this and you think, wow, we've come from far. We really have. So thank you. It's a lot actually to process, to be honest. It's a lot.
So when you walked in, I thought you were going to be coming with an entourage. I'm shocked you didn't come with blue lights and an entourage. And I'm like, I'm not used to this. Yeah. Is that intentional?
Yeah, it's just me. I think it's important, right? When you do your community work, when you do your activism, when you do your parliamentary work, I think it's really important to get a real experience and be on the ground. And you can get that, of course, with help. I mean, I would really appreciate a PA. I don't have a PA, would love a PA. But other than that, I think it's important to get a real feel. Like even coming here, we know there's a state of crisis in Joburg, right? All the different potholes, all the different experiences of water shortages, etc. You get the real feel when you do things yourself. Yeah.
And maybe where I would like for us to start our conversation is your recent address to the president in Parliament 2 weeks ago. For those who haven't seen it, we'll play the video on the screen. But just for you, just to refresh your memory, I know it's stuff that you said, but just to refresh your memory, a quick one, just a 1-minute clip, just so you guys can get up to speed, and then maybe we can start the convo from there. This is a speech that she directed to the president at the Sonia debate.
President Ramaphosa, I must now speak plainly as a young member of parliament here. The youth of South Africa are done begging for a place in an economy that was built on our exclusion. We were told to be patient and we've been told to wait our turn, but you cannot feed a generation with patience. And so here is the demand from us as young people. Treat youth unemployment like a national emergency, not with speeches, but with state power. With a wartime approach that mobilizes every single department, every single public entity, municipality, and every private company in this country, with targets, timelines, and consequences. We are done with an economy of extraction. There can be no license without beneficiation, no tenders without youth jobs, and no incentives without training and decent work. And to the young people who are watching, your struggle is the struggle of our republic. We are not asking for charity. We are demanding justice. So let us be remembered as the generation that created a thriving economy built on abundant and low-cost energy and a society that works for all. Let us turn our mineral riches into a diverse economy, our skills and universities into centers of opportunity. Let us turn our freedom into economic dignity now. I thank you.
Youth unemployment. What a bold speech. Well done.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest problem in the country. And last week we debated the State of the Nation address. And, we hear very important things in these addresses, but I think something that we keep missing every single year is a focus on young people and a focus on what's going on. I mean, if you look at the stats, so out of 10 young people with the broad definition, at least six of those young people are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. And that's regardless in some ways of your qualifications and your ability and your merit. And that is a ticking time bomb. And so we have a responsibility as young people, not only in Parliament, but in the country, right? We started Fees Must Fall, we've moved on into this space. It's now our job to hold up a mirror to the current sitting leadership, but also to say, no longer will we be quiet. We're going to remind you of this at every single juncture because of how big a crisis it is. And it's not something that you can just sweep under the carpet or pretend is going to sort itself out. We need youth unemployment to be declared a state of emergency now, because until we do that, we're not going to get the right kind of interventions for young people.
Recently, the president has just proclaimed the GBV as, a state of emergency. Obviously, you're demanding, and obviously a whole lot of other young people would demand that youth unemployment becomes exactly that as well. How will it help?
Right. So we have a lot of good economic policy, but economic policy in its current format takes time to come to fruition. So a decision we made 5 years ago, you may only see the outcomes on now. Right? You're seeing it in agriculture, you're seeing it in some forms of manufacturing. Now, why we want it to be declared a state of emergency is what it actually does is it forces each and every department, I mentioned it, municipalities, state-owned entities, even private sector companies, to look at their current budget and say, what are we doing in this financial year? What are we doing to immediately address the problem? The other thing that would do, declaring a state of emergency, it removes a lot of the red tape that makes it difficult for young people to start businesses, makes it difficult for you to grow your business, makes it difficult for you to take it to the next level. So we're looking at cutting red tape, we're looking at direct budget investment, but we're also looking at both short-term and long-term intervention. So him declaring it, or President Ramaphosa declaring youth unemployment a national emergency, it's not going to automatically solve the problem. I don't think anyone's under that illusion. But what it will do is channel our resources in the right direction. And if you think about it, think about a piece of paper. If you're all putting your pen in the same place, you're actually going to break through that paper, which is the intention. But if you have many pens in many different ways, you're not going to get where you need to. So that's why we're pushing. And I think the last important point of why it's so important, young people don't feel heard. We feel underrepresented. Young people they're not apathetic in this country. I think we're disillusioned, we're angry. We're just feeling like you're hitting a brick wall all the time. And I think if a national leader like the president can come out and say, we hear you, we see you, we know what it's like. to go through this painful process of consistently trying to get your CV through a door, but having that door shut in your face. Just the dignity of being acknowledged, I think, is very important.
Haven't programs like Abo Yes helped or made a difference? Obviously, in bringing in the private sector, private partnerships with the government. I do know I was a part of a couple of those launches with the president. Hasn't that been successful in other programs that have been mobilizing the private sector?
Yeah, so just before this clip in the speech, I actually mentioned some of those things about the 2.5 million opportunities that have come through. They've just put in 2.5 billion rand for youth-owned SMMEs and women-owned SMMEs. All of that is very, very important. But if it was the full solution to the problem, I wouldn't be sitting here at the table. And we wouldn't have millions of young people outside of this door languishing because of an inability to get a job. So it is helping. I think it is making a dent, but it's a structural problem. And this is what I think we fail to understand, that the way the economy is structured and set up, it is not designed to give particularly young people, particularly young black people, particularly young black women, for example, or queer women, etc., not to give them an opportunity. And until we address the structure of it, we can create many different small opportunities, but we're not actually changing the real lived experience of people on the ground, because we don't only want to help 5 lives. We want to change the structure so that for the next 10, 15, 30, 40, 100 years, young people have a chance in this country. And that's why we need to deal with it structurally.
If you were president for a couple of months and you've had to change the structure, what would you do specifically?
Well, the first thing is you need to mainstream youth issues, right? And this is a Fasiha view. This is so important to say. This is my view.
Yeah.
I think it's important to have a department of women, youth, etc. I think there's value in it. But the problem with having it as a separate department is that every other sort of department says, oh, well, they'll deal with youth problems. Youth unemployment is a problem of Department of Labour. It's a problem of Department of Women and Youth. But now you don't have a Minister of Trade and Industry or a Minister of Agriculture, for example, saying, what are we doing specifically to tackle youth unemployment? And that's one of the first things that I do. I'd ensure that it's mainstreamed, okay, to ultimately deal with the problem. But this is the big one, and this is where it requires some bold, courageous decision-making. The private sector is getting away with murder. They get the very best graduates in this country. They get their first pick, the cream of the crop. And the majority of the economy, 2/3 of the economy, sit in the private sector. And they literally get away with it, right? And they are the ones who are saying, no, it's government's job to create jobs. What government's job and role is to create a conducive environment. And we now need to legislate and regulate to ensure that the private sector, it's not nice to have for ABSA to give 5 bursaries, for example, or whichever big company it is. We need to legislate that if they're taking so many graduates from higher education, they need to invest X amount back into higher education. If these big companies who are exporting our citrus overseas, how many young people have they brought through the value chain? And not catering. We don't want people who are just catering or driving trucks. We want meaningful economic opportunity, and we need to force the private sector to do that. We can try it through incentives and tax rebates, sure, but I think we need to be a lot more bold and a lot more courageous. And I'll link this last point to something that's really topical right now. Everybody always threatens, and they say, well, if you legislate and you do this, private sector will run, capital will leave, they'll disinvest.
In a town under the shadow of a chrome mine, Nomsa watched trucks leave each day, heavy with ore, but light with hope. The wealth beneath their feet left, raw, and returned as expensive goods that they could barely afford. And then the policy changed. A furnace rose. Chrome became ferrochrome. Ferrochrome became stainless steel. And suddenly, work appeared where there was only waiting. Apprenticeships, workshops, suppliers, paychecks, community ownership models turned Nomsa's mining town into a developmental zone. Her brother became an apprentice. Her mother's spaza shop became a supplier. And at home, holding a stainless steel spoon made from their own ground resources. When Nomsa understood that beneficiation is when a country stops exporting its future and starts building dignity. Our resources must not be put into a system that generates wealth in other countries. That must be the foundation of our developmental economic model. And honorable members, it is the ANC who has worked to seize this opportunity.
One of the most fascinating things about Trump and the tariffs that they tried to put across to us, I know it's been struck down by the Supreme Court, the commodities that were not tariffed, platinum group metals, our rare earth metals, including manganese, lithium, chrome, iron ore. And for those at home who don't know, these are critical minerals to create the batteries in our phones, the batteries in our laptops, for example. To run the economy globally, you need these rare earth metals. And so there might be all this talk about capital wanting to run away. But if they really were going to, they'd have left by now, firstly. And secondly, the fact that Trump and even the Americans haven't put any tariffs on certain goods shows us how important those goods are. And that's why another big thing that we are talking about as young people is the beneficiation of these minerals. Because if we don't do that, we actually just, it's like colonial, right? We're digging and people are literally breaking their backs, like poor black miners are literally breaking their backs to extract these minerals. It's going to China, it's going to the US, it's going to Europe, and then it's coming back to us to be sold at like exorbitant prices, when in reality we could be the ones who actually beneficiate and do something to it and create meaning along the way.
It is all linked, and your speech at the Sonia debate was longer. I just played a minute.
Yeah.
Now that you're speaking about beneficiation, that was also a bit of a part of your speech. Maybe let me play that clip as well. I know they'll put it on the screen so the conversation can continue. But for those that might have missed her speech, talking about beneficiation, these are some of the points that she had to cover in Parliament.
President Ramaphosa, you were correct in categorizing mining as a sunrise industry. We possess what the world desperately needs. 88% of global platinum group metals, 70% of chromium, and 32% of manganese. Mining contributes 6% of GDP and employs over 474,000 people and contributes a major portion of our exports. In a town under the shadow of a chrome mine, Nomsa watched trucks leave each day, heavy with ore, but light with hope. The wealth beneath their feet left, raw, and returned as expensive goods that they could barely afford. And then the policy changed. A furnace rose. Chrome became ferrochrome. Ferrochrome became stainless steel. And suddenly, work appeared where there was only waiting. Apprenticeships, workshops, suppliers, paychecks, community ownership models turned Nomsa's mining town into a developmental zone. Her brother became an apprentice. Her mother's spaza shop became a supplier. And at home, holding a stainless steel spoon made from their own ground resources. When Nomsa understood that beneficiation is when a country stops exporting its future and starts building dignity. Our resources must not be put into a system that generates wealth in other countries. That must be the foundation of our developmental economic model. And honorable members, it is the ANC who has worked to seize this opportunity.
So as soon as you say toxic masculinity,
and then Nota comes in. The authorities. The new Botswanan president, when he came in, he mentioned the same thing about their diamonds. I interviewed King Makhosoke Mabena from the Ndebele Kingdom in Mpumalanga about 2 years ago. And he was speaking about how disappointed he is on with a lot of the companies, over 100 companies that operate in Mpumalanga, extracting minerals on a daily basis, trucks going all the way down to Richards Bay, exporting these minerals for billions every year. Trucks going all the way up to Mozambique, exporting minerals every year. And he was talking about, forget his province, forget even his youth. Even he himself, he doesn't even have offices. And he doesn't even have a fully functional kingdom. And you have people from Mpumalanga coming to Joburg, going all over the country to try and look for jobs. Meanwhile, their land is very rich and wealthy with minerals, especially coal. Now, talking about beneficiation, mining is a very important sector in this country. And as the example that I've just made, Mr. Maboko in Botswana, for all of it to be done here at home, as opposed to, as you are saying, exporting it and then from there, importing it and buying it at exorbitant amounts of monies, right?
It's a big deal. You know, there was a time in this country where people thought that the mining industry was a sunset industry. Like, okay, it's behind us, it's finishing. And when we found all these rare earth metals, including coal, platinum, all those things, we realized that actually it's now the other way around. And it's a very fascinating story, actually, Spoo, because much of South Africa's history, the backdrop of it has been mining, right? If you look at the gold rush, if you look at Kimberley, Kimberley was the first city in the world to have been electrified before all of them. And it was precisely because of the fact that they had found diamonds and gold, etc., there. And there's this untold, underlying current, actually, of what it means to be a South African and how it's linked to mining. So I'm not surprised. In fact, I'm unfortunately disappointed again that we can have a situation where Mpumalanga is one example, where you can have such incredible resources, and yet young people in those villages and in those communities, people in general, are so impoverished. When in reality, literally beneath their feet is the opportunity to not only change their lives, but to change us as South Africa. Imagine what we could do if we became the world's major producer of manganese. So I mentioned in the speeches, 32% of global manganese is here, but the purest, some of the purest manganese in the world exists in South Africa. And all of these different, lithium, we've just found a lithium belt in the Eastern Cape recently. Now all of a sudden everyone's trying to go there because lithium is critical for all of our phone batteries, all of our laptop batteries,
electric cars.
Exactly, electric cars. And so the new economies that are emerging in the world, they're sort of hinged on all of these different metals or rare earth metals. And we just haven't, I think, leveraged it enough. And what I will never allow, and I think what we as a generation will never allow, is to make the same mistakes of the past. We must be blue in the face, and if we must go to the streets, we will go to the streets as we did during Fees Must Fall, but we will fight for young people in this country, and we'll fight for our future, because we're not going to allow another colonial model to take everything away from us and give us back nothing. And that includes, by the way, the Chinese.
But it doesn't look like there's political will from the elders there in Parliament.
And that's, I think, what we need to change. This was the first State of the Nation, the first SONA, actually, where the President spoke in detail about beneficiation. And I was very glad about it. I was like, finally, they're starting to hear what we've been saying for a very long time. But that's one of the things we have a role to play on. We need to push the leadership, and this is not just an ANC problem. This is, I think, a problem in the country where you have, across all political parties, a much older leadership who are used to doing things in the same way. So they've done the same thing for the last 30, 40, in fact, before that, even more than 30 years. They've done it in the same way, and they think that is the best way to do it. And you can understand, like, they were able to fight off apartheid, they were able to liberate us, etc. But now you need a new kind of innovative thinking. Now you need a kind of energy, a kind of flexibility, a type of adaptability that I think, unfortunately, isn't present in that current leadership. And like I said, this is not just about the ANC. This is about young people in this country taking a meaningful seat at the table, and not as a checkbox exercise, not as tokenism, but as saying, we are the ones who have to live in this country. With all due respect, you may not be here. We are the ones who have to live with the economic decisions you're making now, and we're going to make sure that you make the right ones.
But some of our political leaders are in on it, because some of them, they're getting kickbacks from these big mining companies, and it's deals they've done many years ago. I can imagine the resistance that will also, occur from within government. How do you break that cycle? How do you change all of that without some of the members getting pissed off that now, they're going to be losing money?
Well, it's fine if they get pissed off, right? I think one thing we learned, it was a bit of a baptism of fire in the past, but we learned that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that will make you unpopular, especially in your own circles. But this thing of the capture of politicians is not new or unique to South Africa. Even if you look at the US system, the European model, etc., big business comes in, they find the right people, and they keep them very close. And this is actually the problem with capitalism in many ways. And I know it's ideological, but it must be said. Because capital will always protect capital, and it will look for ways, i.e. power, political power, to protect it. And that's why you need to break those systems. And that's why I was saying, and trying to push this very particular idea on legislation, it must be in black and white. All the things we've spoken about in this podcast, in the speech, in the government policies, they need to be in black and white, so they're not nice to haves. This is not something that you're going to do with a social and labor plan, what we call SLPs. Where mining companies say, I'll build a school, and then you find 5 years later they have barely built part of the school, or they've built the parking lot of the school. This is a big mining company that's making huge amounts of money and failing to reinvest in communities. And those SLPs, in terms of how we implement it, are not as binding as they should be. And this is just one example I'm giving you of where we need to change the legislation to force the private sector to actually get involved. Because if we don't, we're going to be in a situation in which we actually give away everything that we used to have. And that's, I think, maybe the saddest thing about the whole thing, because we're at a crossroads where we can decide. Either the future continues the way it's going, who knows what looks down that path, or what young people are going to have to do to get agency in this country, or we make a decision to say this is the end of the decline. This is the finishing point. Now we're going to make decisions and now we're going to change things so that going forward, we don't only have young people at the fore, but we've structurally changed the economy for the black masses of this country, not for a minority.
The ANC has been leading for about 30 years now. Will there be that political will or that sense of urgency to want to make these matters happen? Or within the ANC currently, it's just all about panicking that, you know, the next elections are happening in 2029, and right now this year is local government elections. Is there even will or even time or people that are focusing on such matters to make them happen? Or it's just all about the struggle of leadership and power?
I think this is actually the best time to make that change. The ANC leadership, like all of us, realize that it's 30 years, just over 30 years into this democracy. The liberation dividend has not played itself out fully, but now you're in a situation where if you don't deliver services, if you don't fundamentally change the economy, you will be a smaller and smaller and smaller political player. And even though it looks like a crisis situation, maybe it's my personality type, I always see opportunity in crisis because that's the time in which you see the very best of what needs to happen. Everyone stops all the other fluff and flowers and frills and says, right, what is truly important now? Delivering water, delivering electricity that is affordable, dealing with the potholes on the ground. That's one element. The other element is fundamentally changing the economy. So yes, is there a state of panic? Yes, but there's a state of panic because that panic realizes now that until we do the things I've just spoken about, we're not going to be a political player. So actually, I think we're at a moment in which you are seeing actual political power and political will shift. Because no longer is it a time when the ANC enjoyed a deep majority, where it was so important, or let me say it this way, where your internal dynamics were more important than your external. Now the external dynamics are more important than what's going on directly and internally in the ANC. Of course, those two things are linked, but if you don't solve what's going on in the economy and service delivery, there is no ANC then to save. And there is I think there's a deep appreciation for that from the leadership. I think where my concern comes in is the pace at which we're dealing with it. And maybe it's because I'm young, maybe it's because I'm impatient. I'm like, no, we need to push, we need to work even faster, because if we don't, what's going to be left?
I interviewed Minister of Communications, Mr. Malati, and at the time he was telling me he's one of the youngest members of parliament. And you also, are you the youngest or whatever youngest?
I'm one of, in the previous administration in 2019, I was elected at 25. Now I'm just over 30, so I'm one of the youngest. But that's actually a good thing. It actually shows progress. And one of the things I said in the previous term was that I actually don't want to be the youngest member of parliament or member of the provincial legislature. It must be that there are so many young people that we're actually having a conversation of, shame, look at those old ones, they're on the side. So the fact that there are many more young people across political parties is a really big plus, but it's still not enough. In a country where the majority of the population is under 35, you can't just have a sprinkling of young MPs. You actually need a base of young MPs and then maybe a sprinkling of advisor. No, I'm trying to be
elderly
polite.
with the wisdom.
Yes, the advisory roles that they can play. But it is progress. It's just not as quick as we need it to be as well.
Yeah, and according to your observation as a young person with other, at least now younger members of parliament, are you seeing any bit of a different environment or ecosystem or I would say working condition in parliament with young people being present, or their numbers increasing every year?
Let me put it this way. This is the first term where we're seeing other podcasters like yourselves, I mean, I know it's satire and it's really funny, but play out different portfolio committee meetings that happened, different commissions. You see people when you go into different spaces, you know, with their phones watching the ad hoc committee. You're seeing all these different trends and videos trend and go viral. Like even the debate that we spoke about right at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, even your speech went viral.
Exactly. And that is evidence, actually, that you have younger people in a different working environment in the space. So I think you are starting to see it. I think a lot more young people are getting exposure to politics and how it all works. But until that exposure equals meaningful change or impactful change, I think young people in this country are still going to feel disillusioned. Because it's one thing to see something on your Instagram or your TikTok about a portfolio committee on higher education. Yeah, it's entertaining. But has that directly translated into more young people getting NSFAS? You know, is it translating into more student accommodations, an absolute crisis at the moment? Has that meeting translated into more accessible, affordable student housing? You see, and I think that's where the link is not as strong as it needs to be. So it looks trendy now, and we're starting to see a lot more young people getting involved on a surface level. But for me, it's what's the next substantial step?
But it does show a bit of a positive shift, right?
I think so. I mean, I've gotten into social spaces like Groove, and people are like, yeah, what about this ad hoc committee? What about that? And I was like, oh, it's starting, right? You're starting to see young people who have always, to be frank and to be clear, young people in this country have always cared about our future. We have always cared about politics. I think it's just up to recently we haven't felt that we've had a voice. And that's where I think we're starting to see things shift.
When we're speaking about Mr. Colin Malachi, I remember at the time when we were having that conversation, he was telling me they were having chats with the owners of TikTok around the creator program that is open to a whole lot of other creators all over the world, but it's not open to African creators. And earlier on, we're talking about all these different opportunities and some of these policies that you can change to make things better so young people get employed. Obviously, it's not only in the mining sector, even in that communications or
100%.
tech digital sector, there are a whole lot of other young people that can change their lives if programs like that, for instance, TikTok, start paying young creators, etc.
It actually shocks me. It absolutely shocks me that TikTok doesn't monetize in the African continent when such an incredible amount of content is coming out of it. And one must ask the question directly, is it also a colonial approach? Because it's not that there isn't traffic. It isn't that we aren't pushing engagement. I think we're pushing huge amounts of engagement. I think you're seeing huge and incredible creators that are coming from the continent but are just unable to monetize because of how the system is set up. So I think this is actually an opportunity for TikTok. If they lose the opportunity, that's on them. There's so many new platforms that are also coming up now. And it's actually a struggle that we need to wage. And I'm very glad you mentioned President Colin Malachi. He's the ANC Youth League president. And this is one of the campaigns and one of the things that we are pushing, because it sounds mundane to the older generation, but these are careers. Being an influencer can be a career now if it's monetized. You can actually create meaningful economic dignity for yourself through all of these various TikTok contents, not just TikTok, but across the space in terms of what we can put out there. So again, it's shocking, but in the same light, I'm like, where can we solve this problem? Yes, we can negotiate and engage TikTok, but we can also legislate and force them to do it. If they want to be a player in the country, they must ensure that influencers and content creators are covered and actually monetized.
Time for brand new hustles, and it is time for you to hustle, especially those traders. You're probably looking for the right platform to trade with, and a lot of people do know that we're in that digital era. People are learning to trade, people are making money online. Are you going to join them? Are you going to get into a reputable platform? While digital financial instruments remain the most unpredictable and risky assets for a lot of people all over the world, Pocket Broker is among the first platforms to offer BTF, ETF trading. For those that trade, understand what I'm talking about. BTF and ETF trading, and with up to 92% profitability, more crypto assets will soon be available on the platform, providing the best trading conditions. There's also 130 plus assets available. You can profit from currency pairs, indices, stocks, and cryptocurrencies. Assets are available 24/7, allowing you to trade at any time. You can also deposit with crypto or withdraw, and Pocket Broker offers convenience and commission-free withdrawals. The platform also has got a referral program, Pocket Friends. That's what it's called. If you invite a friend and then they top their account and start trading, both of you and your friend will receive bonuses. For example, if your friend deposits $50, then they receive an additional $50 as a bonus. And when you get a bonus of up to $10 credited to your balance. All you need to do is create a referral link. The process of creating the link on the platform should be shown. You will see it over there, and share it with your friends and receive some rewards. All the best. Time for new hustles. Let's make this money and trade with Pocket Broker. You guys did some incredible work a little over a decade ago. Nabo Nompendulo, Abo Viani Pambo, a whole lot of you guys, Abo Mtsebo, during the Fees Must Fall campaign. Some of us, got ourselves involved. Yeah. And I remember working with you, Nompendulo, when we were doing the benefit concert, when we were raising money.
That's right.
For you guys. That was incredible. I interviewed former UCT youth president, SRC president, Rorisang Musedi. And I was asking him about the achievements that you guys had with the Fees Fees Must Fall. Now that it's a decade later, that fight that you guys had, are you seeing any positive results that were produced through that struggle or through that entire campaign right now?
So it's actually 10 years since Fees Must Fall. Fees Must Fall was 2015, 2016. It's now 2025, 2026.
Sorry, I also spoke to Dr. Simamkele Dlakavune also about that. And I think they've also put together, a book where they were just writing in all the positives and some of the things that happened and things they feel, you guys achieved.
But also like narratives that were excluded from student and youth voices post that time. And I'll answer your question now about whether we think, it's moved forward or backward. But post that time, there was a lot of academia, a lot of Adam Habibs of the world writing about it.
Is he still in the UK?
Yeah, I think he is. And I mean, he wrote a whole book and, it was just quite shocking, some of the things that came out of that because there was no right of reply. And the point is their content and narrative got out there when in reality it was students. This was a movement led by young people for young people. And we were not involved in the creation, again, of what that history looks like, right? So we hear that idea that those who are in power decide what the history looks like or who writes history. And I'm so glad that so many different voices are contributing to what that period was, because I think there is an erasure to some extent, or a very intentional depoliticization that's going on in student campuses and university campuses out of fear of what young people can do in this country. But to answer your question, have we moved forward? In some senses, yes, but in many other senses, no. And this is a very difficult conversation to have, especially for me, because I'm in Parliament now. I used to be on the Portfolio Committee for Higher Education. I'm no longer there. So let me talk the positives. NSFAS is now not a loan, it's a grant. So
that's a big achievement.
I would say that's one of the biggest achievements of that time.
Actually, that's what Rory said. He said for them, that's the biggest achievement.
And he was so involved. I mean, Rory did incredible work at UCT around the decolonization movement, which I think at the time we really brought that decolonization conversation to the dinner tables of South Africans. So we were really able to get the agenda out there. But since then, and there's a combination of things that I think have happened. Yes, the fiscus is more tight, but I think you also have a very intentional thing, and I mentioned it now, of university management trying to depoliticize student representative councils and student activism. So they do it in different interesting ways, right? Which is not a problem. They have an academic requirement to be in an SRC, fine, that's not a problem. But they reward behavior that isn't political in nature. So it's like choosing prefects, as opposed to having young people in the school decide who their RCL is. So they handpick, a few prefects of people who they think will just sort of fall in line. And that has contributed in some ways to this, I think, degradation of what we had built. And I'm also, it's a self-criticism in some ways, because a lot of people are like, well, why did you guys go to Parliament? Why did you move on? In some ways, we had to move on. We had to hand over to the next generations. Otherwise, we'd be accused of leading from the grave. But also, you wouldn't have given space to newer generations to decide what their future looks like. At the same time, it's now our job to wage the struggle in the halls of Parliament, to say, actually, National Treasury, you are not giving enough money to student funding. You're not giving enough money to student accommodation. Actually, public infrastructure, public works, what are you doing about all these abandoned buildings in town when you could be turning them into meaningful student accommodation? So it's about how you grow the struggle going forward. So there's some really incredible things, but in truth, I think there are also things that we've gone backward on. And it's important to reflect on that as well.
Still talking about some of the things that have happened that were not positive. A lot of the students ended up finding themselves in prison.
You're right.
Some of them got released recently. Some of them are still inside.
Yeah. And
anybody speaking about those names? Anybody doing something to help those students that are in the inside? Because you guys were fighting a good fight.
And we were all fighting the same fight. And this is the challenge with, I think, mass movement and mass protest in some ways. There were so many people who were in the extremes arrested, many of whom served time. And there were also so many people whose mental health collapsed, who were excluded, who were suspended, who were expelled, who lost the ability not only to study, but to change their futures. And that is a narrative and a story that hasn't come out strong enough. So we did a whole major campaign around amnesty for those students, and we got a lot of amnesty for several hundred people. That was quite important. But I don't think that was enough. I think it was a time in which students should not have been criminalized. Yes, we were protesting. Protest by its very nature is disruptive. If you're not protesting in a disruptive way, it's a protest, right? Because then you can be ignored, you can be swept under the carpet. And young people in this country then and now were and are fighting for a better future. And I think that's one of the stories that has been left behind that we need to bring up to the fore. And we have the privilege and I think duty, responsibility to bring those voices back up precisely because we're in Parliament, precisely because we're on the other end of the extreme. And I accept a lot of the criticisms that have come towards us about those two extremes, about the fact that we're in Parliament and others lost so much. That sits with me every day, if I'm being honest with you. It sits here, not as a guilt, but as a responsibility and a duty. And that's why when I spoke and I directly spoke to the president last week around some of the issues around youth unemployment. I don't know if you saw it. It's visceral.
I even saw how passionate you were. Even your voice was vibrating.
And in truth, my hands were shaking. Things that people can't see. I was gripping onto the podium, not because of just the nerves, it's because of the anger of what we have had to fight to come to this point and what we are still going to have to fight. And the fact that, yes, they fought for our freedom. Yes, they liberated us. But that doesn't negate the fact that we as young people are demanding justice. And I said that. We're not asking for charity as young people. We're done with that. We're done with this economy that leaves us behind every single time. We deserve a meaningful place. And if you're not going to give it to us, we're going to fight for it. And if you're not going to open the door, we will kick down the door. Because gone are the days where we're going to patiently wait for you. In fact, we're done. We're done waiting.
Youth entrepreneurship, business?
Big one. I'm also very passionate about this. Big business plays a huge role, yes, but we're actually going to create more jobs with youth entrepreneurship and small businesses. And that's why I mentioned it earlier, 2.5 billion rand has been set aside for SMMEs, particularly women and youth owned. There's also another 1 billion rand that's going to be put aside in guarantees. Now, why is that important? You can have a business that's going to be quite successful, but if you don't have a guarantor, that means going to the bank and saying, this is a person who can help me or a company who can help me pay off the loan if I can't. You're not going to get that loan. You're not going to get that microfinancing. And so the state has a fundamental role to play to guarantee those businesses to say, we believe in you. We're going to take a chance on you. And we're going to ensure that as you build your business, I mean, this is organic, right? You grow your business and you're like, oh, all of a sudden I can't fulfill all my orders.
Yeah.
Let me ask someone in my community who I grew up with. Let me ask him to join or her to join the business. And if every company, small or big, particularly small, grows just by a small percentage, even if all of them just add one person in terms of employees, we can create millions of jobs, even in a single financial year. Of course, that's a big ask. Of course, that's a tall objective, but it's possible. And that's why entrepreneurship, particularly youth entrepreneurship, is so important because A, we have the energy, B, we have the time, and C, this is the biggest one, we're innovative. So we're looking at the different trends globally. We're looking at what competitive edge we have as South Africans. We're actually creating industry that didn't exist. Look at the cannabis economy. Most of that is young people. Unfortunately, it's not enough black people. It's still a white boys game, and that's something we need to change. But you're seeing the creation of new industries precisely because young people are in the space. And that's why it's actually critical to the economic plan to have young people at the forefront.
Young people have to be in the forefront. You know, when it comes to young people, even the digital or the tech industry, there's a lot of money there, and there's a lot of ways on how young people can maximize.
It's huge, absolutely huge. Even how we leverage off AI to build industry, to build society. I mean, we're not having these conversations, and it's controversial for some, but how do you use AI to increase service delivery? How do you use AI to assist a rural gogo in a village to get to the next level? How do we make sure, for example, that drone technology could perhaps deliver her medicine to her doorstep? Right? In an area, let's think about the floods that have happened now in Limpopo and Mpumalanga and in all parts of Southern Africa. We are unable to go into those spaces. What happens to people who are HIV positive? What happens to the gogo who needs her arthritis medication? How do we get things in there? And young people are providing solutions to that problem. The water crisis. Young people are finding all sorts of innovative ways. Toilets that don't use water to flush, for example. So for me, it's actually like a no-brainer. Bring young people into the space, allow us the actual space, the budget, and the opportunity to change things, and you'll see a fundamental shift, not only in the economy, but in society as a whole.
But also when it's election year, it seems as if like politicians lose some sort of focus, and that sort of impacts government in doing its job and service delivery issues, etc., etc. Because almost a lot of the people are the same people, that are campaigning for their political parties, but then they've got their government commitments and duties where work still has to be done even in an election year. Right now, you're looking at an ANC that is at like a little under 40%, and I can imagine your resources as the ANC and the people that work within the organization and some that work for a government. I can imagine your resources are more directed towards the elections rather than the actual work. Am I wrong? Am I right?
There's 2 points on this. The first is that is why we've put in a lot of energies and efforts to professionalizing the public service. So the idea is that regardless of who the mayor or MMC or minister or MEC that's on a provincial level is, you should have a functioning government department that cuts grass, that picks up your refuse, that if there's a water problem, you can intervene. And that's been a huge focus of the local government intervention. So that's one thing. But the second thing, and I said it earlier, this particular elections, not just 2026, I'm talking also 2029, these are service delivery elections. In other parts of the country, they'll tell you that was a climate election. For Trump, it was like an ideological election. For us in South Africa, these are service delivery elections. And so all political parties, not only the ANC, are actually putting in all of their resources, efforts, and energies. And I know this sounds like, oh, we should have done this before. Of course, there's no doubt, right? But all of the energies and efforts are actually going in towards service delivery achieved. Because if you don't, forget the election. You've lost. If you don't restore water in the city of Joburg, for example, now, in Knysna, in rural parts of Matitiela in the Eastern Cape, you've lost. These are service delivery elections. And I'm sad that it had to come to this point, if I'm being quite honest. But I'm also in some ways reinvigorated because finally, all the things that we've been saying, all the things you've been saying at the table for so many years, finally, people are like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. We actually have to do that. So I actually think that you're going to see a lot more structural change. The president announced that there's going to be a water crisis committee, and so many people are like, oh, another committee. But I sit in the energy portfolio. The National Electricity or Energy Crisis Committee, NECOM, has been critical to bringing about the end of load shedding. Right? We have load reduction, which we are working on ending in the next 2 years as well. That's now, so load shedding is Eskom, it's generation. Load reduction is local municipality, City of Joburg, City of Cape Town, that's where load reduction is. But we've made a significant change in the energy sector because of this kind of crisis committee. And I'll end on this one. It brings together the best thinkers in the private sector, in think tanks, in academia, in government, even international expertise are going to be in these water crisis committees like it was in energy to solve this problem at its very infancy. COVID was a good example of this. We saw the very best of South African society coming together. We operate, I think, at best in a state of crisis. And maybe that's why we want youth unemployment to be declared the state of crisis or a national crisis. It shouldn't have to get to that point, but it seems to be that's the only way we act. And water right now, I think, is maybe single most one of the big things that we need to solve in addition to youth unemployment.
So we'll have more podcasts on the network as we keep growing. We currently have 2. It's just myself and Nota on Mondays. Nota said 2 interesting things last week's episode. I'll tell you the second one, but the first one, he said he suspects that the water crisis is intentionally manufactured because people want to eat.
So the water crisis is not because of a lack of water. So in other parts of the country, one could make an argument of a drought, Eastern Cape, etc. But in more urban parts of the country, it isn't because there is not enough water. That's important to say. The problem has been infrastructure maintenance, water reticulation. So the pipe is this thin when it should be that fat, sort of thing. So now as more people are moving in, the pipe infrastructure is not enough to service those amount of people. So has there been some level of negligence? Yes. And it must be acknowledged because it's unacceptable. And in order for you to fix the problem, you have to acknowledge where the problem is. So the problem has lain in maintenance, governance, etc., etc. But the benefit of that is that it's more easy to solve. If we were sitting at the table saying South Africa has no water at all, Now that requires a lot more intervention, a lot more investment, etc. So has it been created to eat? I don't know about that. But has it been created because of a lack of maintenance and because of a lack of putting in investment where we need to? Yes, that is the truth. And that's something that we need to acknowledge in order to fix. In the same way, we allowed the energy infrastructure because everyone wanted cheap electricity at the time. We just ran the machinery and equipment and the turbines to its fullest point. In the same way we didn't maintain it then, same thing has happened with water. So it's a good and a bad thing. It's good that we have water there, but it's bad because now we need to actually invest in the infrastructure to bring the water to the people, quite literally.
So you guys in Gauteng, you have been foreseeing this problem coming? Because I do remember Mayor Tata Morero, I think was it early 2025 or late 2024, he did advise us as the residents of Johannesburg to get ourselves JoJo tanks in our houses.
Yeah, I think the problem has been the acknowledgement that there is a challenge and getting money from National Treasury. And I don't know if those who are watching it who, like for example, I live in Joburg. Yeah. There's been a lot of planned maintenance by Joburg Water and by Rand Water. So this kind of planned maintenance has started already, particularly over the last 2 financial years when Mayor Morero had spoken about it. But because of so many years of neglect, and let me also just say this, is also one of those spatial apartheid problems. So if you recall, the way the apartheid government set up the infrastructure, whether it was about roads, energy or water, it was never designed to look after masses of people, particularly not masses of black people. Now you fast forward to democracy, people can live anywhere they want. They obviously move to economic hubs like Joburg, like Durban, like Cape Town, all those places. There's an influx of people. The infrastructure, even the sewerage infrastructure, is not sufficient enough to look after that amount of people. But of course, you have to look after education, you have to look after policing, you have to look after healthcare. You only have, for example, 10 Rand in the budget. And so unfortunately, what happens is you're like, okay, I'll deal with that next financial year. We're okay for now. Until you're not okay, which is where we are now. And so it's many, many years, again, another spatial apartheid thing. I mentioned the pipe. It sounds like a small thing, but there are many pipes that are just too small, that just need to be putting in with new infrastructure to look after the kind of amounts of or density of people that's there.
It also speaks to the immigration problem,
yes.
right? Because then you've got a lot of other people who are undocumented,
exactly,
who are overcrowding this entire infrastructure.
And that's the case, by the way, with everything, with schools, with healthcare, and maybe I must say it, right? Because I think this is also missing from the narrative. The problem with the current discourse is it's putting up poor people against poor people. So it's putting up poor South Africans against poor African immigrants. And I'm using emphasis on African. It takes away from the fact that we're all poor in that space. And we need a more structural solution to all of our problems. That doesn't take away from the suffering of South Africans. By no means does it do that. But what I don't like about the discourse is it puts, again, 2 black people up against each other, when in reality the economy remains owned by a white minority. They are the ones who have first pick of everything. And actually, in many ways, they're laughing at us. Look at them fight amongst themselves. They'll never actually gain access to true meaningful power in this country while we're fighting with each other. So 2 things. We need to manage immigration better in this country. The ANC acknowledges that. We must have a better system. We must have better border control. We must have a better system to document people. Secondly, South Africans must be looked after in a country that is their own. Now, that's not xenophobic. It's not Afrophobic. It's about providing services. Now, that means we don't make the enemy African immigrants. The enemy is a system that sets us up against each other. And that, for me, is missing in the discourse. Because once we structurally solve youth unemployment, once we structurally solve water, healthcare, education, it means we're not going to have 50 kids in a classroom. We're going to have many classrooms with 20 or 30 kids in, which means it actually can be okay for a child of an African immigrant to come in, because then it's 21, not 20. But now the problem is because we're failing to deliver services to all people. You're now sitting in a situation where there's 60 kids in a class, which is unacceptable. So I think it just must be said that the real enemy here isn't each other. It's a structural system that was never built for us. It is a colonial system that hundreds of years later can still beat us because we have misunderstood what the project or what the objectives should be.
The second interesting thing that Nota said last week was, we're still talking about youth unemployment now, because there's other places where capital will always dominate in a capitalistic society. He was talking about the government. You did mention it also earlier, that the government had put out, I think, 2.5 billion for youth entrepreneurship, and then you said they had found another billion elsewhere.
Yeah, for guarantees, so a little different.
For guarantees,
you don't
right?
get that money, but it can be guaranteed against a loan from the bank, for example.
I get you. And what he mentioned was statistics currently speak about a 4 billion rands that goes into gambling. And he was talking about the gambling companies are making now over $1 trillion per annum. And this thing just recently, yes, gambling has been around for quite some time, but because now it's on people's
Online,
phones,
and
it's
like a
literally
game.
facing them every day. You're finding that their numbers are exorbitantly increasing, the amount of monies that they're making. What are the systems that government is putting in place, not only in taxing big gambling companies, because now they sponsor everything. They've got all the money. And other sectors are also struggling because of gambling. If somebody was buying 4 more fires a month, he's probably now buying 1 or 2. And I'm sure even other industries as well. Because a person, instead of me buying a more fire can, let me rather take a chance, I'll probably win 1,000 rands.
Maybe.
Let me just maybe gamble, right? So what systems is the government putting in place such that that money doesn't only benefit the government, but it's also maybe channeled to some of those initiatives you're talking about, youth unemployment, businesses, etc.
I'm so glad you raised this thing. This is another untapped industry. And you're right, they're making huge amounts of money, also off the backs of poor black people in this country. And they must be taken to task on that, right? One of the things that's already happening is there's a gambling bill at the moment that's passing through Parliament. It's actually a Section 76 bill. So the way that works for those at home, you get 2 types of bills. One only goes through National Parliament, Section 75. A Section 76, which is where our gambling bill is, it affects provinces. So it has to go to each province as well for them to make input in addition to National Parliament. So the the gambling bill has been around for the last few years, actually, let's say 4 or 5 years, because there's been a lot of back and forth about this. And let's be honest, I'm sure gambling companies have influenced other provinces. So for example, we were ready to pass this bill, but the Western Cape legislature sort of put a veto, not a veto, that's the wrong word, said no. And they created some challenges with the previous iteration of the bill. And the honest truth of why they're doing that is because they're able to get some revenue from it. Now what we're saying is all that revenue must go into a national fund, and that can be used for example, dealing with youth unemployment, dealing with whatever issue. So we are having challenges in that regard, but we need to fast track that legislation. And again, we need to be bold. We need to be courageous, because that money cannot be taken out of the pockets of poor people or middle class people in this country, or even wealthy people in this country, and it not being reinvested into society. So this is a very big thing. I think we've let it grow beyond where it should have. And it's something that we need to focus, not only legislation, not only regulation, but we need to do social awareness campaigns. You know, in the same way we did all this work around the HIV/AIDS crisis, about how you contract it, what to do, what not to do, etc. We almost need to do that with gambling. And it's actually an interesting thing that we've gotten to this point, because in one ways it's indicative of that lack of hope or the desire for a better life. But at the same time, it's indicative of the fact that we actually do have a thriving economy. There's money in the economy. It's just not going to where we need it to go. It's not being reinvested into our communities. And so there's also ways to force these companies, gambling companies, to give not only a certain percentage through tax. We must tax the rich. We must tax these corporates. But there's also ways in which we say, you need to be funding all of this kind of advocacy work in communities. You need to be funding certain high schools. You need to be funding healthcare. You need to be funding mental health institutions. That's another whole conversation linked to gambling that we're not having. So I think it's something that has gone too big in the way that it's not been managed. But as I said, there's legislation currently in the pipeline, and we do need to find other, I think, creative ways to get that money back in to communities.
And also talking about where the money has to go to the right place where it's supposed to go. Will there also be means that are put in such that comrades don't eat? Because if I'm a gambling company making so much money and I'm like, I'm fine, and all other gambling companies will come to the table like, okay, that's fine. we're not going to be happy if that money is still going to be stolen
100%.
by comrades. Can this
100%.
money go to literally empowering South Africans?
100%. And I think that's where those legislations and those regulations become really critically important around where that money is channeled. And there's ways to prevent it, right? You don't just put it in a fund with no rules. You can be very specific. It can go into what we call conditional grants, okay? So people don't know this, but it's not easy to get a conditional grant from National Treasury. You have to fulfill a number of different, you have to jump through hoops of fire actually to qualify for this money. That's one way we can do it. The other way we can do it, and this may be an unpopular view, but let's say it. You can look at a gift of the givers, for example. You can look at NGOs who are doing incredible work and say, well, how do we, and now this is separate to the tax. Let me be very clear. The tax must still go to National Treasury through SARS. But there could be a certain percentage that we say, now that you are operating and you've reached whatever threshold of so much money, you actually have to give a certain percentage to NGOs, for example, like Gift of the Givers, who we know are doing such important work, for example, around the drought in the Eastern Cape. You know, I'm just giving you examples in ways in which if there's an erosion of trust in the political system, there's still ways we can get that money into communities, and there's still ways we can manage it such that it goes to where it needs to go.
The current administration, it's 3 more years to go for our current president to vacate.
Yeah, till 2029.
2029, yeah, to vacate office. What do you think of his leadership so far and the achievements thus far? Because when one listens to the Sonia, you hear more of criticisms as opposed to some of the successes that he's had in his administration.
I think he's had such a tough time, to be very honest. I mean, coming in as president after the Zuma years, after the eroding of state institutions, and we undermined this thing. There was no capacity in the National Prosecuting Authority. There was very little capacity in SARS, for example. I mean, even in Eskom, right? The ability to actually bring energy and bring electricity to our meters and directly to when we switch on the lights wasn't there anymore. And so in many ways, this president was always going to have a difficult run. Always going to have a difficult run because of that erosion. Then you throw in COVID. Like you get in, you're like, finally, we're starting to see some of the reforms work. COVID hits you. The whole world stops. The whole economy stops. And in addition to that, you also have to deal with the fact that, and we can't run away from this, that the renewal of the ANC has been fundamental to the renewal of the state. And you're dealing with a time in which there's so much instability. And I'll answer your question honestly in a moment. COVID happens, fine, you think it's under control, the reforms start to work, and then 2024 happens, Government of National Unity, where you don't have as much of a mandate, where you don't have as much power to actually put across something like phase 2 of BEE, for example, right? That we also need to talk about at some stage. And so I think there have been some good things that have happened, but there's also some very difficult ones. One thing we do have is a president who doesn't run away from those issues. A president who can stand at a podium in front of not only Parliament, in front of more than 62 million South Africans, in front of global investors in the world and say, these are the challenges we've faced. We're not running away from them, but these are the interventions we've put in. So this is the first year, or not the first year, but we're seeing a lower inflation rate. We're seeing our credit has gone down. SAA has just turned a profit. So has Eskom. That profit's being reinvested into actual state infrastructure. Transnet and PRASA. PRASA's reopened almost all of the corridors for passenger rail. Those trains that people are getting in are actually built here in Nigel, in Gauteng, by local people, local South Africans. So you're starting to see the green shoots of those reforms come through from Operation Vulindlela, from all of these different interventions. Has it been slow? Yes. And it's been slow precisely because we had to start from scratch. So you get into an institution, you realize, hey, nobody knows what's going on here. Now we need to go find the right people who know what's happening, give them space, give them budget, and slowly start to rebuild. So in that way, I think the president's done an excellent job in truth. And I think we're only going to acknowledge this and see this 20 years from now. But in other ways, it's been a challenge. We still haven't solved the economic crises of the country. And that's why what needed to be said was said in National Parliament. Many people said, how can you say that as an ANC MP? We have every right to say it. In fact, we have a bigger right to say it because we choose to be a member, or we choose to be members of the African National Congress. So we must be even harsher with our own leadership to say, actually, it's not okay that out of 10 young people, 6 are unemployed, 6 don't have an opportunity. It's not okay that we have a GBVF crisis, that even me as a very privileged person in this country doesn't feel safe to walk outside at night. You know, these are all things that are not acceptable. And we must solve and we must fix. That doesn't take away from the successes, but it does mean that a lot more work needs to be done.
I heard him get a lot of praise over the past, say, maybe a year and a half to 2 years, as far as our foreign policies are concerned, from the Israel matter to how he handled Donald Trump.
Yeah.
What are your opinions as far as that's concerned? And Elon Musk and Starlink and the tariffs and USA getting pulled out. Shemis had to go through quite a lot.
Exactly, right? Like, I even forgot about adding in the stuff about the fake white genocide. I'll answer it like this. Cometh the man, cometh the hour. This was the kind of stately president you need for the current global crisis. So we think we have problems in South Africa. When you go overseas to other countries, people are literally in war zones. Look at Sudan, look at Palestine, but even look at the global shift of power. Look at what's happening in the US. If any of what was happening in the US was happening here, people are like, South Africa's really, it's unrescuable, what's going on. Police are killing people, not only black people, but black people as well, in the US over immigration issues. And so you actually have a state president through President Ramaphosa who has masterfully navigated a very difficult situation. On the one side, let's talk about Palestine and the ICJ case very quickly, and then we'll talk about the US. This was an opportunity for us to regain our place in the global world order. South Africa historically was viewed as a moral high ground, a moral voice, because we were able to negotiate our freedom, not through a civil war. We were always brought into difficult global situations to help mediate. I don't know if South Africans actually know this. We played a critical role in different conflict zones around the world. And that actually President Thabo Mbeki was also renowned for, not just African Renaissance, but managing really difficult war-torn spaces. So the Palestine case at the International Court of Justice was critical because it showed the international world that South Africa still has a voice, number one. But number two, when you have a bully in the playground, I don't know if anyone has ever experienced this.
We've experienced it all, man. We're all from high school.
Exactly. That bully, the last thing that they want you to do is stare them down in front of other people because everyone's so afraid. Everyone's cowering from Trump. Everyone's cowering from the West. And when you stare down the biggest bully in the playground, you gain a literal kind of power. So the Global South's voice is represented in South Africa. I've just come from the Munich Security Conference and a number of other global spaces, even at the UN. Random people coming up to me. South Africa represents the Global South in a new way. We're part of the shift in global world order. So we're seeing the fall of empire with the US and the Europe and the UK. Already it's on the decline. BRICS is the new multipolar world. South Africa plays a critical role in that. And now when you go overseas, people are saying, we want to actually be associated with South Africa because that's where the shift of power is happening. And had we not taken Israel to the ICJ, we were not actually going to get to that first point. And then the second is, had we not stared Trump down in the eyes and actually went to the White House and said, there is no white genocide in this country, and continued to negotiate and find ways to ensure that AGOA and other sort of trade agreements isn't lost. If we hadn't done that, we also wouldn't have a place in the global stage. So now all of a sudden, people are saying, South Africa's back. South Africa's not just back in terms of economic reforms, which we've spoken about at length. South Africa's back with a big voice in the change of global world order. And as the world shifts towards BRICS, towards Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, we are going to play an even bigger role. So in terms of foreign policy, I think we've actually had an incredible run, and I think there's a lot more we can gain from that. Now the question becomes, how do we take all of that goodwill we have in the global space? How do we translate that to meaningful change? And I'll give you a very good example. We are actually opening up more trade markets outside of the US, outside of them, but in BRICS countries and other global, BRICS plus countries and other global South places, so that we can, when the time comes, if they want to be very difficult with us, it's not going to be as bad as people think it is, because we'll have opened up other trade routes and other trade opportunities for South Africans all over the world. And that's the point. The majority of the global South, or the world, sits in the global South. The majority of power is also going to sit in the global South. And it's unfortunate that the fall of empire is what we are seeing. We're seeing kicks of a dying horse. But I think our best years as South Africa are still to come.
You start listening to international, especially American social commentary voices like about Nick Fuentes, about Candace Owens, about Tucker Carlson, about the late Charlie Kirk. A lot of these voices that are sort of starting to change their rhetoric,
Yes.
especially over the past 2 years. Do you think all of that, South Africa has got a big part to play with what they did at the ICJ to sort of show the entire world the real truth about what's been happening in Gaza? And you're also starting to hear those voices say, no, wait a minute, who can be okay with babies getting massacred and with nobody doing nothing? And we must still be okay with it.
Exactly.
Right?
World sentiment has changed. Public sentiment has changed. And why it was so important for South Africa to speak is we spoke at a time when it was not popular to do so. And that is why we've gained so much credibility, so much moral high ground, so much opportunity from this space. Because you're right, all of these American podcasts, now all of a sudden the genocide's wrong. Now all of a sudden we must recognize a state of parliament. Now all of a sudden Sudan, what's going on in Sudan is an absolute crisis. We have to speak up. That was always the case. But we were the ones who led the way in changing the view, not only of South Africans, but of a global population. And I'll end you with this example. I'm part of a women parliamentarian program, international. And we were at the UN late last year in October. And we were ready to take on some of these German guys and EU guys around their poor stance on not just Gaza, but I mentioned it on Sudan, on all of these sort of issues on Yemen, etc., Syria. And we're now ready. It's me, it's the Egyptian MP, it's the MP from Tanzania. You know, we're like an African cohort. They were ready to fight. Before they even get to note us in the round, the Finnish member of parliament from Finland, she speaks and she's like, it is unacceptable what you guys have allowed to happen in Gaza. And she goes on to mention not only Gaza, but all these different global conflicts. And when she spoke, I sat back and I realized this is the moment. Public sentiment has shifted. And it will always shift towards justice. It will always, because it's unconscionable. You cannot kill children. You cannot kill innocent people. You cannot do that. And when she spoke and she defended these things, we didn't even have to speak. There was no need. Because people who are there in the very center of that power are saying it's not okay. So I think a time will come when history is written. South Africa has not only stood on the right side of history, but I think there will be many opportunities for us, not only in trade, but in so many other ways, to regain our standing on a global perspective. And it's difficult for South Africans to connect that to the issues. But if we are able to open up a whole new market, for example, with North Africa or with the Middle East around meat, for example, that's one of the things we're exporting to them. It means we can close the gap that we may lose from Europe, from the US, etc., and create an even bigger market. Remember, there's more people in the global south. If we can sell more goods there, it means we can grow our economy even bigger. It means there's even more opportunities than we have now. So we must always understand all of this is linked. Nothing is dissociated. Look at what's going on with Venezuela. That's another thing that we need to be aware of. If they touch one of us, they touch all of us. And isn't that what African culture is about? Community and collectivism.
I listened to a very interesting interview last week, just recently, with the ambassador to Israel, American ambassador to Israel, Mr. Huckabee, right? I think he sat down with Tucker Carlson. They were just talking about the Gaza Israel matter and the land theft and other people being deemed as the people that are rightfully have got a birthright to certain lands. What an interesting conversation. When you've got time, go check it out.
Yeah,
Mr. Huckabee and Tucker Carlson. I want us to get into while we're still there. Geez, I'm getting a little bit absent-minded. I had a very good question to ask you, but it's fine. We'll come back to that. Let's go back to the local government elections. Your readiness as the party. Now, I'm moving you from government back to the ANC. What's going on internally? Is the ANC renewing? Are you guys confident about the upcoming elections? Are you guys panicking? What's going on within the ANC?
We actually just spent this weekend in various election workshops in various regions around the country. So I'm in the Gauteng PTT, that's the provincial task team. So it's like a provincial level of the ANC. And I'm deployed to Tshwane. So we've been doing this sort of work. In fact, everybody, I suppose, is already in election mode, moving towards that. But what I said earlier is critical. This is a service delivery election. And so what becomes pivotal is the restoration of basic services in the country. And it's not only about the election, it's about using the election for that political will to bring about that change. So it's about reorganizing capacity, reorganizing ways in which we do things so that we can ultimately get to a point when we get to that election day where citizens are saying, actually, we do have what we need. And so that's I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but it must be said that there are opportunities in crisis. We're all in full-on election mode. The NEC, of course, will make their pronouncements. I can't make any pronouncements on any mayoral candidates. They're still in the process of discussing and finding a way. But I think there is an appreciation that this is our most important election to date. And it is most important because local government elections, literally, where the tire hits the tar. So people, when you vote nationally, you're voting on legislation, you're voting on national issues, umbrella issues. Minerals is one of those. But when you're voting in a local government election, you're voting for something that affects you every single day. And that's why I think this is such a big one. So I think it's all hands on deck. All of us are bringing in every skill, every ability forward. And I'll end with this, the very best of the ANC. Not only in terms of people, in terms of human resources, in terms of every single element is being channeled towards the renewal of the ANC. Because we understand we renew or we perish. We evolve or we die. There's no other choice. We must evolve the African National Congress. And I'm saying this to you. I've said it to the president. We say it to all the upper echelons of the leadership. You have to. You have no other choice. Because otherwise the ANC will die in your hands. And what a sad state of affairs. That this, not just political party, this movement, this liberation movement founded in 1912, who became the oldest liberation movement in the continent, who influenced so many people into freedom, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world. Even the Irish Republican Army has ties to the African National Congress. All of these liberation movements. So it cannot be that it dies in our hands. And that's why people ask me, why are you still a member of the ANC? Because I still fundamentally believe that the ANC can be saved. And I still fundamentally believe that a renewed ANC is what will renew the state and ultimately renew the country.
Will it be saved by Mr. Patrice Motsepe?
Who knows? I can't pronounce. The man says he's not available, right?
Did he say so?
He's saying that, but
so
there's
he's
still
not running.
time. There's still time. It's only 2026. It's only February 2026.
Okay.
There's still time. There's 2027. It's not quite there yet. So we'll see. I mean, there's many hopefuls, but we haven't formally opened up the race. And that's why I think you'll see all the hopefuls or all the potentials are going to be very hesitant to say it. I think once they open up, which won't be now, remember, we must focus on our local government election. But afterwards, we'll see who's available and who's not. But I will say this. We need a dynamic leader. We need a leader who is going to steer us through very, very treacherous waters. But we also need a leader who South Africans believe in. It's not enough to just get elected in an ANC conference now. We need a leader who's going to restore the hope of millions of South Africans.
Is that leader Mr. Paul Mashatile or Mr. Fikile Mbalula?
Let's wait for it to open and then we can discuss. You see, you'll get me in trouble. So let's wait. I'll come back to your podcast once it's open season and we can discuss.
Yeah. An interesting conversation we had with the mayor on my radio show on Radio 2000. He also said the same thing. Like, hey, you're going to get me into trouble. I don't want to talk about the succession plan, not now,
And also maybe to say that the succession becomes irrelevant if we can't renew the party. And if we can't deliver basic services to the people, in all honesty. If you go to a random South African now, they'll be like, I actually don't care. What I care about is the fact that I'm living in an nkuku. I'm living without electricity, or I'm living without water. That's actually what's the most important. So I agree with the ANC's position. Let's focus on that first, and then we'll come to succession after.
The opposition parties and some political analysts are saying ANC is about to be relegated into becoming a rural party. Helen Zille is running, mayoral candidate for city of Joburg.
Yeah, despite being the mayor of Cape Town and actually living in Cape Town. But hey, I'll just leave it there.
And then you've got Mr. Herman Mashaba, who's just announced as well for Action SA. I don't know who's running under the EFF or for the EFF. I don't even know if they've announced.
I don't think they have yet. Yeah.
Your chances as the ANC in Gauteng, in Joburg?
Well, that's why we have to work. Our chances are fundamentally linked to many things, actually. But the first is service delivery. The second is trust, and that's the difficult one. You can deliver services, and I think we can do that, actually, as the ANC. But until we restore trust from people, we're going to always have a challenge. And that is, I think, the existential crisis of the current ANC. We've had many existential crises throughout history, If you look at the 60s, when you were dealing with the treason trial, and then you looked at the slump of the 70s, but then young people, and this is the point I want to make, you saw a slump after the treason trial, Mandela, all of these people now in jail, Tambo's in exile. The struggle is at its lowest. And then you have young people who, not only in 76, but particularly in 76, pick up the mantle and say, yes, our leadership may be in prison, they may be overseas, whatever, but we are still going to fight for our freedom and we're going to put ourselves on the front lines and fight for it. We're in that moment now of the ANC history. We are facing an existential crisis again. And therein lies a critical moment for us as young people, not only in the ANC but in the country, to say we are going to take this country forward. So are we at that point? Yes. But the ANC has always, and this is the fascinating thing about ANC history for those who don't know, the ANC has always thrived out of crisis and birthed a new era, not only of political party, but of social movement. And I think therein lies that particular moment for us now.
Will your Joburg candidate be Mr. Morero?
We don't know. We'll have to see.
We don't know.
We don't know. I don't want to pronounce the national leadership. Let me tell you this. The national executive is fully seized with this issue. They're discussing, they're looking, they're making decisions. You've mentioned some of the candidates that have come from other political parties, and there is an acknowledgement that we must put our very best forward. And I appreciate that the national leadership is saying that, because it's not only about Joburg. It's about all of our councillors. It's about all of the people. Gone are the days where you just get in because you are part of the right faction. That is actually changed. So it might take a little bit of time, but I think that when the mayoral candidate is announced, I think that we'll be a lot more comfortable because we'll know it has gone through a very rigorous process.
You're saying it's about all councillors, all different provinces, and I hear that political analyst calls himself the Prince of Politics, Mr. Prince Mashele.
Yeah.
Heard him 2 weeks ago on the podcast. He says the ANC must just forget it in the KZN. In eThekwini, the ANC is gone forever. That's what he says.
I don't obviously live in KZN, but I'll give you my thoughts, and let me also caveat that with they're my thoughts, they're Fasiha's thoughts. MKP obviously did a number on us, no doubt, right? The proof is in the pudding, in the numbers. We went from 54.5% to 17%. I mean, it is, how do you say, you're breathing through the wound. That's how we say it in sort of political jargon. But you're also seeing some incredible interventions. The president himself, through a presidential working committee in eThekwini, has focused an incredible amount of efforts and energy through current mayor Cyril Xaba to actually turn that around. So you're seeing major service delivery interventions. And anyone who does live in eThekwini or is going up and down, people are starting to see those benefits, right? That's one thing. But it doesn't take away from the fact that I think there's a greater ideological battle happening in KZN around Zulu nationalism. And it's a difficult positionality for me to speak on. I'm obviously not Zulu. I'm married into a Zulu family, so I have some sort of insight into it. But I think that therein lies the greatest battleground. So there is all these other things politically, but until you deal with the fact that there's a great deal of tribalism that's been playing itself out, I don't think we're going to see any sort of political movement back or forth, that being said. But it would be interesting to hear people who live in KZN, because like I say, I'm not an expert, I must caveat that, but it will be interesting to hear what they think and say. Because there is this personality cult around the former president, but it's very individualistic. What happens when he's gone? He's a human being like you and I. We're all mortal. There will come a time where we're not all there. What happens at that stage? So it is interesting, but I think it's an uphill battle, and that's why we as the ANC, the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, has said that they're looking very deeply in what we can do to reinforce that particular structure and reinforce those interventions. And who knows, maybe I'll also be going up and down to KZN to do election work. But the point is, we must respect the electoral outcome, which we as the African National Congress always will do. I have my doubts about Umkhonto we Sizwe political party, whether they will respect the will of the people and what that outcome is.
A lot of the things that, scholars and intellectuals and people have been following politics for quite some time will tell you the one thing that sets the ANC apart is you don't have one individual leader speaking on behalf of the party. It's got a lot of leaders. It's got a lot of brains within it. Why is it that all the other brains that are within the ANC that we know about, some of us that have sort of been exposed to some bright minds that are within the organizations, sort of don't emerge, or we don't even see them? We're just probably seeing the familiar or same faces over and over for many years. Where are all these incredible minds that are within the ANC?
Yeah, so the ANC is what we call a broad church, meaning exactly that. It's a large organization with lots of different people. I think it's also because of our internal electoral processes, which we are actually looking at fundamentally transforming. One of the big discussions that's on the table before 2029 is looking at something called a one member, one vote. So instead of just having a branch, which we could still do, having a representative go to a conference and then vote, it's easier to do vote buying and that kind of thing. But if you have one member, one vote of 1 million members, it's very hard to buy. I mean, you can't give them all R1. It's not going to work, right? It's actually making it very hard to do vote buying. That's one thing that we're trying to do to bring up different people and different sorts of thinking. The other thing is also how we're starting to select public representatives. So even for me to become an MP, I went through a number of different interviews. So apart from like the paperwork you have to fill in, what you're going to do, all of the ideological stuff, the political stuff, we went through very rigorous interviews in which we were asked incredibly difficult questions around legislation, around politics of the ANC, etc., etc. And so you're starting to see that system produce different kinds of leaders. And we are now going to implement that system with councillors as well. So we've done the community meetings. We'll be doing that again this particular year. And for those who don't know, it's not just the ANC who's going to choose councillor candidates, it's the community. So if we have 3 or 4 candidates within the ANC, we're going to subject them to a community meeting, which is very difficult for a candidate. So the community must say, we know this person, we don't know that one. So it's going to deal with a lot of factionalism, actually. It's going to be like, what we know, Spoo, when my power goes out or when the drain's blocked, I go to him, he helps me. Hey, Fasiha, I don't know who that one is. Let me rather support this one. And so let's say Spoo may have struggled to get through an ANC system because he belonged to the wrong faction or, he maybe pissed off the wrong leader. No. Now Spoo actually has the ability to become the councillor candidate because we are changing the systems in which we choose our leaders and our public representatives.
Sure. I'm so proud of everything you've achieved, and what an awesome interview. It's good to see you, and congratulations on your marriage.
Yeah, thank you.
The fact that you came whilst you are in the period of fasting, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's Ramadan, but it's good. I feel like it sharpens your mind. And maybe this is a good place to say it's Spoo. People don't know this. I've actually double-barreled.
Oh.
So now I'm Fasiha Hassan Duma.
Oh,
officially,
Fasiha Hassan Duma.
Registry.
Finally, for the first time on the podcast. Congratulations. So Hassan Duma,
That's it. Huh?
D-U-M-A.
D-U-M-A.
Duma, not Dube, Duma. Duma, guys.
You
Congratulations.
heard it here first.
So I'm also double barrel now. You can see on the book there. Sibusiso Leope Wenkosi. I've just recently double barreled last year. Why politics though?
Yeah.
You could have done so many other things.
I could have been a lawyer, trained as a lawyer, started articles, left that behind. I think for the same reason you and I at this table, we're activists. It's a fundamental part of who we are. And until we have a country in which we are genuinely equal, there's always going to be work to do. And I just think, and this part is true, politics may be flawed in many ways. It may be muddied by all the negativity that we see. But it is still the single best way to structurally change society. And like I keep saying, not 5 lives. We can change 5 million lives, 65 million lives. We can change so many people's lives if we get the political system right, because it means everything else falls in line. And I still fundamentally believe that a better South Africa is not only possible, it's going to be achieved. Hopefully in our lifetime. You always want it to be in front of you, but even if it happens after we die, at least we'll know that we used the life that God gave us to its very best to help the majority of our population and to leave this world in a better way than we found it.
So you're proud of the decisions that you took. You're glad you decided the political route.
There's days when I'm very frustrated and I want to bang my head against the wall, and those are the days where I'm like, yeah, this is probably why I chose the right space, because you need people who, okay, let me say it this way. I could easily be in a legal firm or in any sort of private sector role earning a lot more money than I do now, to be fair. And this is going to be a shocking thing for people to say, and for me, for like, oh, look at this MP, so privileged with money. No, you can make a lot more money in the private sector. When you choose to be a public servant or be in the public space, you agree fundamentally that it's not about you, it's not about your salary, it's about assisting as many people as we can to have a better life. So yes, politics, again, is difficult. There are frustrations. But more of us need to be in politics in order for us to change society. We're not going to do it from the outside. We have to be inside, with all of the complications and contradictions that come with it.
What do you still want to achieve? How does your future look like in politics?
Oh, I don't know.
Obviously in family, many children, and you know what I mean?
Well,
but it's still
amount
politics.
of children, like an economical amount of children.
Yeah.
Let me say this. At the end of this 5 years, in 2029, I want to look back and say, Parliament not only has more younger representatives, but we've changed the system from a colonial one to a more decolonized one. That when we go to the election in 2029, and I say this to young people all the time, we feel that we don't have power. But again, the majority of the population is under the age of 35. If every young person in this country of voting age just registered to vote, before we even get who you vote for, just registered to vote, we would turn the voters' roll on its head. And if every young person in this country voted, again, forget who you vote for. Obviously, I'll say vote for the ANC. I wouldn't choose to be a part of the ANC if I didn't believe in it. But even if we just all voted as young people, we would turn Parliament on its head. We would have young ministers. We'd have young presidents. And we'd be able to decide what our future looks like. So at the end of 2029, I want young people to feel that there's been a shift. I want them to feel innately that they haven't been left behind, that their voices have been elevated. And it's intangible, I know. I can give you all these metrics of things I want us to achieve, and maybe that's another conversation about how many minerals we want to beneficiate, how many jobs, all of that's there. But for me, it's about creating more dignity and for young people in this country to finally feel heard. If we can come to 2029 and young people feel better about that, then I'll feel like there's some sense of success.
Beautiful. Before we close off the interview, I know we touched on it in passing. I just want to double click on the fasting.
On Ramadan,
on Ramadan for religious purposes. I was fasting beginning of the year. I do it every year for 21 days, right?
Well done.
Not necessarily for religious reasons, but I also do a lot of prayer, fasting and prayer. But it's also good just for my health and detoxing from the festive season and all that stuff. I want to talk about the actual process, the reasons for fasting, obviously religiously as far as you're concerned, and also how does your body take it, and what happens? Take us through that cycle as we wrap up the interview.
Look, it's about discipline. It's also about removing certain things from your life. And so everyone thinks, how do you survive? No food, no water. Because people are like, even no water. Because it's a complete dry fast.
I'm sure now, guys, you can see why I did not offer her water on this episode. So don't think I'm slack. It's because she's fasting.
But I'll be taking a mofai home. That I'm going to do.
Yes, I've got more for you.
But it's about discipline, but it's also about teaching yourself what's really important. So by removing food, by removing all these other things, water, you can't have sex while you're fasting either. By removing all these different things, it really gets you down to the base spiritual level. And even if you're not religious, it detoxes your body, it allows your liver and everything to recover, but it also reminds you of what you really need, and it gives you a clarity of thought. It's a very strange thing to describe. Ramadan's a very peaceful time. Yes, it's hectic because I woke up at 3:30 this morning, all of that stuff, and you have prayers late into the night. But there's this moment of peace, and you feel one with your Creator and one with the world and the universe. And you realize, actually, yes, I have this political career, I'm a member of Parliament, all these things, but none of that actually matters unless, and this is my prayer, I'll be very vulnerable. This is my prayer to God at night, late at night, deep into the darkness of the night, when I ask God to continue using me as a tool for social justice. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I'll always be in politics or if I'll always have the privilege of being a member of Parliament. But I do ask that I'll always be in a space where I can help people and change society, and that I can be used as a tool, again, for social justice. So for me, Ramadan's a really important time. It's a centering time, but it's also a reminder of what's really important. So it's not about the clothes or the hair or the glamour of what people think politics is. It's about the core reason of why we got involved in the first place. It's the reason why we marched on the 14th of October 2015, when it was not popular. It's the reason why we did the benefit concert to raise as much money for students who have nothing. It's the same reason why even after I leave this podcast, even after you leave this podcast, we go back into our community work. Because until we change society, until we leave this world in a better way than we found it, the objective or the mission's not done.
Beautiful. Quickly, still on religion. Just recently listened to J.D. Vance in the U.S., the vice president, about a month ago, if not 2 months ago. So he had a conversation around wanting to try and convince his Muslim wife to become Christian. I want to
She was
hear.
Hindu. I didn't know that.
I could be wrong.
No,
It's probably
I know,
Hindu.
I don't know, but she's not Christian. The point is she's not Christian.
Yeah, the point is she's not Christian. But because of what he represents and where his future is going, J.D. Vance, obviously he's got aspirations of becoming a US president, right? Obviously a lot of people say he was funded by Mr. Peter Thiel. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Interesting with what he said. You've just recently gotten married, and by the way, congratulations. Well, how did that conversation look like with your significant other as far as religion is concerned? Because obviously people do say within premarital counseling, you guys get to speak about such things.
Yeah, so look, Islam, like Christianity, like Judaism, Abrahamic religions actually have a lot of similarities. And it's just because I think often we only have exposure to one that we don't realize those commonalities between those different religions. I mean, the belief in one God. We believe that Jesus, peace be upon him, is a prophet of God. You know, there's so many ways in terms of how you live your life that are common throughout all those things. So that was a critical part of our conversation. But in truth, my husband, after quite some time in a process, actually chose to revert to Islam. And so he's also a practicing Muslim. And it's fundamentally also because we have the same value system and principles. And I think that's the biggest thing. Not everyone's going to be of the same religion. And there's so many examples of interracial, interreligious couples. But what it comes down to is just who you are and your set of principles. And if there was a line, then I think you can build a life. And very importantly, it needs to happen in this country because we always talk about a rainbow nation. We talk about non-racialism, anti-racism, etc. But the more we stick within our own inner circles, the less we are building South African society and doing the kind of nation-building work that needs to happen. So not just in our political lives, but in our personal lives as well.
Mrs. Hassan Dube, thank you so Duma,
yeah.
Mrs. Hassan Duma, thank you so much for your time. Your last words to South Africans over there on that camera.
I know it's easy to feel left behind, to be disillusioned, but the reality is change is not only coming, it's here. We're seeing a democracy mature, we're seeing young people come to the forefront, and what is really important is that we as South Africans have our voice heard. And that's one of the things that we need to do through the podcast, through our community work, but also at the ballot box. So I'm hoping, Smoo, you'll invite me back. Lots to discuss.
It's home, definitely.
Lots to discuss, but I think the bigger thing is South Africa's best years are still to come. I fundamentally believe that, and I think that we're going to see that.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for the incredible work. Thank you for the consistency and just being not weak, being tough that you've been. Shem, I can imagine what you go through all the time. But continue fighting the good fight. Appreciate your time.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Mrs. Hassan Duma, thank you so much, guys, for watching the episode. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.